Before you call it an entity, rule out your own projections and assumptions. The topic of entity attachments and interferences has become more popular over the years, and with it, all kinds of oversimplifications, distortions, and even outright nonsense. One of the biggest issues is when people make assumptions about entities, especially assuming they are present in others, based on all kinds of generalized symptoms that could have many other causes and are often completely unrelated to any specific entities. Here's an example of a popular post that exemplifies these oversimplifications and distortions. It talks about 5 signs someone around you is carrying an entity. They are: number 1, you feel anxious and dizzy around them for no reason. Number 2, they struggle with addiction or compulsive patterns. Number 3, they cross boundaries without noticing or caring. 4, you feel drained after spending time with them. And number 5, you notice eye contact feels weird. All these points from 1 to 5 can have many other causes and are not signs of carrying an entity whatsoever. Many people you encounter may have all kinds of issues and trauma responses that result in addictions or bad vibes. They may have had just a bad day, are going through some hardship, are in a bad mood, ate some crappy food, and so on. They may cross boundaries because they lack social skills or relational awareness due to childhood wounding or just being narcissistically wounded, which, by the way, doesn't mean they are a full-blown narcissist. What you pick up from a person and may make you feel drained can also be their unconscious shadow, their mother complex, and unintegrated anima animus. In fact, Carl Jung talked about how that can feel heavy and draining to another person. Or you pick up on their pain, suppressed wounds, and stuff they're going through, which can also drain and affect you. Their eyes can reflect that as well, and it doesn't mean that there's an entity. Moreover, your neuroception may be off because you're not in a regulated state and project your own dysregulation onto another person. You may be stuck in a dorsal or sympathetic nervous system response without knowing it, and hence you may mistake a safe situation or a safe person for dangerous, to the point of assuming that the other person must have an entity. In other words, your gut response is off when you're not in a regulated, embodied state connected to self. Most people live in a constantly dysregulated state. They're completely unaware of it because the condition has become normalized to them. Or it is countertransference. Very important to understand the concept of countertransference. That happens when you unconsciously react to someone based on your own unresolved childhood wounds, unconscious shadow, lack of anima animus integration, and other projections that the other person triggers in you unconsciously, and then you start to relate to them through that lens without realizing it. In other words, their presence triggers your own stuff, which you then project on them, and it has nothing to do with them carrying an entity. Now, does that mean that entities don't exist and they don't possibly affect us that way through others? No, not at all. Entities are real, and they can work through other people and also through you without you noticing it. However, you need to understand the deeper mechanics of how these occult entities operate and first and foremost rule out anything else before making assumptions based on oversimplified, generalized symptoms, all of which could have very basic physical, psychological, or emotional causes. Moreover, you need to know yourself very well before attempting to diagnose others with having entities. This self-knowledge encompasses foundational psychological self-awareness and an understanding of your inner world, particularly a grounded and practical grasp of shadow work, including all your triggers and projections. And you also need to be aware of the different parts and sub-personalities within you and how they are separate from the true self. Everyone has them, but most people mistake those personality parts for the true self. You need to be able to differentiate shadow aspects, sub-personality parts, and inner child parts and not mistake them for entities in other people. This is a huge issue. Much damage has been caused by practitioners offering all kinds of entity removal modalities who claim to exorcise, clear, or remove an assumed entity that was actually a fragmented sub-personality part that needed to be integrated. It can result in more fragmentation and even psychosis. You need to be grounded in self-energy before you can make accurate assessments about others. Otherwise, your perceptions are flavored through your distorted lens, and you see entities where there are none. All the esoteric occult teachings of the ages, from different traditions, East and West, emphasize the necessity for self-knowledge and ruling out anything else before assuming one is dealing with some entity's psychic attack or even earthbound spirit. The great occultist Dion Fortune said 100 years ago in her book Psychic Self-Defense that one must not assume one is dealing with a psychic occult attack or entity possession because they can often be indistinguishable from psychological neurosis, and that one must first exclude all the other things it can possibly be, starting with physical and psychological issues first. Rudolf Steiner repeatedly stressed the importance of knowing one's own inner nature and inner world before attempting to make judgments about the spiritual world. He said, "If we haven't developed deep self-knowledge and sincere self-assessment of our own nature, we won't recognize our inner patterns when they are reflected back to us, and we'll mistake them for something alien, foreign, or external in the spiritual world." In other words, it's easy to mistake your own shadow aspects, fragmented subpersonality parts, or wounded inner child for entities, and just as easy to project that onto others by mistaking their unintegrated parts for entities. Even people with psychic abilities or clairvoyance can fall into this trap if they lack grounded psychological knowledge and psychological self-awareness. Discernment starts with knowing yourself. Know your inner world before you try to diagnose whether someone else has an entity or not. Otherwise, you risk seeing entities where there are none and doing more harm than good.